Louis XIV was born September 5th, 1638 in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, France. He was christened Louis Dieudonné Bourbon, which translates into English meaning gift to God. This could be derived from the fact Louis's mother, Anne of Austria, gave birth later on in her life at age 37 after suffering multiple miscarriages and stillbirths. Anne and multiple others at court really believed that Louis was ordained by God to be king. Later on in his life, Louis would further this image of a king picked by God himself by labelling himself with a sun insignia. He is still known today as the Sun King. Everything from his stationery, bedding and clothing to the metal on his palace gates contained his sun insignia. Louis was primed to be a leader from being a young child, receiving a practical education rather than a scholarly one. He learnt subjects such as history, politics and the arts. The education route was supposed to make him a better ruler and fairer king. In 1648, when Louis was almost 10, the Parliament of Paris rebelled against the then regent of France, Cardinal Jules Mazarin. In an attempt to overthrow the crown, the rebels waged a civil war named the Fronde. Throughout the 5-year-long civil war, Louis suffered many hardships, such as poverty and starvation. Once victory was achieved in 1653, Cardinal Mazarin began to build an elaborate and trustworthy government, which Louis observed even though at this point he had come of age. Not long after, Louis fell in love with a woman named Marie Medici, who was Mazarin's niece. However, he chose duty over love and married the Princess of Spain, Marie-Thérèse, who was also his first cousin. Doing so, ratifying the peace treaty Cardinal Mazarin had established with Habsburg Spain and creating strong foreign relations with it. Although Louis held a fondness for Marie, he was never faithful to her. He fathered 13 illegitimate children with 3 of his mistresses and had liaisons with countless others. There is even debate between historians on if the king had an affair with his brother's wife, Henrietta of England, as the paternity of her first child was questioned. When Cardinal Mazarin died in 1661, Louis was in his early 20s. The young king took the reins of the French government and quickly took to reforming France to his own visions. His first major change was centralising and controlling France with the help of his finance minister, Jean-Paul Baptiste Colbert. Louis managed to establish reforms that cut France's financial deficit and promoted huge industrial growth. He also managed to fix France's extremely disorganised taxation system and limit broken borrowing practices of the time, which were essentially loan sharks. During this time, Louis made his nobility exempt from taxes, which also made them more dependent on the crown. Another way in which he centralised the French government and controlled his nobility was by moving the official royal residence from Paris to Versailles in 1682. He transformed his father's old hunting lodge into a public monument of royal opulence. The palace had over 700 rooms and gates surrounding it were covered in gold. Everything in and around the palace shouted riches and prosperity. Though Louis's grandfather, Henry, granted multiple leniencies for Protestants in a heavily Catholic France, Louis was less tolerant. Louis was insistent on the Catholic faith being the only religion in France. He overturned the Edict of Nantes in 1685 and replaced it with the Edict of Fontainebleau, which essentially destroyed all Protestant churches and schools. Louis further backed this by persecuting Protestants and making Catholic baptism mandatory. Along with being known as the Sun King, Louis was also known for his love of women. Along with his wife Marie-Thérèse, Louis had many official mistresses over his lifespan, starting with Mademoiselle Valerie and Madame de Montespan, who he had several children with, and later on in life legitimised to create his own large royal dynasty. His last mistress, Madame de Maintenon, he actually married after the death of his queen in 1683. They married in secret in the middle of the night on the 10th of October, 1683. The king's sister-in-law, his brother's second wife, the Princess Palatine, wrote in a journal, "What is certain is that the king has never been so passionate about any mistress as he is about her. It is rather curious to see them together." It wasn't just women that Louis was interested in. He was also interested in numerous fields such as music, as he played the guitar, horse riding and hunting, fencing, billiards and dance, and he liked a bit of a gamble. The king was in fact so fond of dance, he performed around 80 roles in over 40 ballets and created his own dances that became the official dances of court that all his nobles had to perform too. Louis surrounded himself with the most sought-after artists, writers and performers, and at the Palace of Versailles, Louis would throw the most lavish, extravagant parties. The parties at Versailles are still famous to this day. He had fireworks and grand feasts.
Louis XIV is notorious for his overbearing approach to foreign policy. From 1667 to 1697, his army grew from 30,000 soldiers to 400,000. In 1667, only 6 years after he took the reins of leadership, he launched the War of Devolution. He invaded the Spanish Netherlands, which he claimed were owed to his first wife, Marie-Thérèse, as inheritance. However, pressured by the English, Dutch and Swedish, he retreated and returned to the frontier towns of Spain and claimed some of them around Flanders. This outcome did not best please the king, and this led to the Franco-Dutch War in 1672, and this lasted 6 years. In this war, France acquired a lot more lands around Flanders, and during this war, France acquired a lot more wealth and became a country on the rise. This is arguably his most successful war campaign. This rise in power and wealth showed the other countries of Europe that France was indeed a dominant power. This was not taken well by England, the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, as they formed the Grand Alliance, which started a war in 1688 that lasted until 1697. And though France emerged with most of its territory and borders intact, its resources were greatly affected, and taxes on the working class were raised several times to keep up with the war. The final war that Louis took part in was the War of the Spanish Succession. This war was by far the most disastrous for Louis and for France. Starting in 1701 and ending in 1714, Louis went in aid of his grandson Philip V's inheritance of Spain and her empire. This war lasted 13 years, and it caused France to be famine-riddled and plunged into huge debt, which in turn turned Louis's own people against him as they were starving. This is arguably Louis's least successful war. At the end of his life, Louis told his heir and grandson, "Do not follow the bad example that I have set for you. I have often undertook war too lightly and have sustained it for vanity. Do not imitate me, but be a peaceful prince." Louis XIV died of gangrene September 1715, one day from his 77th birthday at Versailles. His 5-year-old great-grandson succeeded him as Louis XV.